Hello and welcome everybody to the Truth Lab. I'm your host, Alex Landry, and today is episode 9. And I am really looking forward to this episode with our special guest, Matthew Belair. Matt, how are you doing?
I'm great, man. Thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, man, I'm really excited for this. If I recall, I interviewed you maybe like over 4 years ago, maybe five, and that was a lot of fun. And I was part of the National Health Federation at that time, and I still am as an advisor. But I think of it, with that episode, we really focused on like peak performance, self-actualization, and I really enjoyed it quite a bit. And since then, man, I mean, I gotta say, you were live streaming in Ottawa during the whole Freedom Trucker situation up there, and I got really inspired. And you dropped a little truth bomb, an Easter egg about Tartaria, and man, oh man, one thing's led to another, and the world fairs, and I'm just so grateful. So I'm really happy to have this time to have some fun conversations with you.
Yeah, for sure, dude. That's a long time ago. Yeah, the Freedom Convoy was definitely something. So it was nice to be in Ottawa to see all that architecture, to be around that. They have some pretty spectacular buildings over there. So I'm glad I could open that up because it seems like from my friends and peers that are willing to dive down any rabbit hole that comes up that's worth exploring. Almost everybody is on the Tartaria rabbit hole trying to sort out what was going on with that because it's just very deep and very fascinating, and I think just a very important part of our history.
So, how did you first hear about Tartaria?
I heard about it from Mike Winner in the Alpha Vedic podcast, and it was like we had finished. He had interviewed me, and I was talking to Bear, and they had brought it up, and I was like, "This is one I haven't heard of." Like, it sounds like a whole big, topic that I've never even heard about because he's talking about the mud flood and Tartaria, and that was years ago. And then I slowly started plugging away, and it's become more and more relevant, and then it's becoming more and more popular. It's almost kind of like ayahuasca. Nobody really knew what that was, and then I kind of knew about it and explored it, and then over time it became a little bit more known, a little bit more known, and then all of a sudden everybody was talking about it. And I feel like we're almost maybe at that tipping point of like it's becoming a little bit more mainstream, and then everyone's going to explore it because there's so much truth in there. And in my experience of going down all these rabbit holes, for me, what I've discovered is like we often don't get to the absolute truth, but we're able to uncover a lot of the lies. You know what I mean? We're able to say, you know what, this makes no sense, right? To find the exact true story can be a little bit tough sometimes and a little bit muddled, but we're like, what they're saying, the official story, you over time you're like, that's complete nonsense, whether it's the moon landing or something else. You're like, so there's so many fishy loopholes. He's like, I don't know, like something's off, right? But what exactly happened can be left up to mystery.
Well, I guess let's backtrack a little bit. So when would you say your truth seeking journey began? Was there like a pivotal moment?
Yeah, so for me, it was interesting because when I was a kid, I was always kind of like this. So when I was very young, I just was doing martial arts and very interested in God, very interested in consciousness, very interested in the meaning of life. And so even in my teenage years, I was reading books on lucid dreaming and consciousness and God and Zen and all these different things. And I was really interested in like how the world worked and what was going on. I also didn't understand starvation and war. It made no sense. Like the world made no sense to me at all when I started to look broadly at what was happening. How can we be an intelligent species and have war? How can we be an intelligent so-called advanced species? But I only had two channels as a kid, and one of them was just the World Vision, where people were starving to death. It just never made any sense. And so I just kind of started uncovering things. I remember even just being in high school, telling my buddies about international bankers and these big influences, potentially like starting wars and funding both sides of the world wars and things like that. And so no one was really interested, but for me, I was always just very curious, and that curiosity has just been with me my whole life. And that's why I started the podcast, traveled to maybe 25 or more countries. I don't know exactly what it is, and studying with Native American elders, just trying to find like the truth and solutions. And that's how we met, right? Just looking for different avenues. Some people wake up when they look at one thing, right? They look at health. So I have one friend who's a dietitian, and she's very educated, right, from the universities and all that. And then, after a few years, she's like, just recently, she's like, oh my goodness, like, do you even know what's going on with the food? I was like, yes, I do. And then, so we're talking about this, and she's all into it, this and that, right? And then I was like, well, look at that. And the big chemtrails going over the sky. I was like, they're spraying. She's like, what? She's like, no, that's not real. I was like, yes, it is. So it's like, we're looking at it right now. And so, she's kind of like just at the opening of her journey. But I feel like there's one thing when people get curious, like they notice something is off, they investigate it, they come out and realize all the lies and deceit, and then they're like, oh, now they start to be more open to, maybe this isn't the truth, maybe I didn't get the full story here, maybe there's something deeper going on. And so for me, I would just always like that. I just kind of saw the nonsense and was very curious about what is actually going on, what's influencing things.
That's fascinating, man. It really is. You've been a lifelong truth seeker, and I mean, I guess from everything you've experienced, where do you see all of this going? Like, how is it culminating? Uh,
Yeah, I just laughing because I've been wrong so many times in my life, but I've always been willing to just keep going forward. One really important lesson that I was taught was the guy, very fascinating guy again, Core Love, Corey Herder. He kind of went by multiple names, but one thing he taught was this thing called the formula for truth. And basically, what it says is, you take two opposites, right? Like God is real or God is not, or evolution or something, or flat earth and round earth. And that's actually the first time I actually used it. And you have the X and Y axis, right? And then one is one point of view, one's the other. And the truth is somewhere like in the middle, like, let's say 45. So each person is discussing their point of view, and what most people do is they argue their point of view, right? They're not letting any of the information in, and if you just take it as information, right? So that person has their whole life experience. They have their everything they've read, everything they've heard, everything they believe, everything, right? We're automatically shutting that down, right, for our point of view to kind of argue. So no information's getting in. So Formula for Truth basically says that when you open up and just seek understanding, right? So, oh, why is it you believe that? Oh, what's the best information? Well, have you considered this? Why is it this? Why is it that? And really get inquisitive. Now you open up rather than shutting off that 45 degrees of information they have. You're opening up the whole scope of 90 degrees because you already know what you know. You've already seen what you've seen, right? You're not gaining anything by like imposing that on them, or even sharing it. The more you receive from them, the more information you have. Now, if you do that with every single person, just imagine how much more information you're receiving. And so you get closer and closer to the truth, right? And so that's kind of how I have been doing things for a very long time. And what it is kind of culminating to is going back to, there were seeds when this was planted. The first seeds were when I would go and go to Burning Man, or I do my travels, and people would say, I had a bad experience on psychedelics and I got to a realm of demons. All this horrible stuff was happening, right? This is kind of like from my hippie days and going to different festivals. And they'd say, Jesus saved me. And I'm like, holy smokes, that's a crazy story. Then I got into human trafficking, and it took me about 3 months of working with this organization to kind of accept how bad it was, and just being dumbfounded by how horrible what was going on, by the scale of by what's going on, and just by understanding. So it was after 3 months, I kind of accepted, like, oh, this is actually a real problem. How did I not know this was going on, and to the scale it was going on? And so these people, they actually worship the devil, and they do satanic rituals, and they kill kids, and they do all kinds of horrible stuff. And it's so unspeakable and unthinkable when I articulate, which I should probably be careful who I tell this to sometimes, but the average person can't take that information, right? The average person cannot even entertain that idea. I'm pretty open-minded, and I remember when I was first hearing about it, it was tough for me to even entertain and look at. But I had to. And so I was like, these people are doing satanic rituals. Like, what is going on with that? And then I went to the law summit. And so in Canada, as you know, we did the trucker thing, and Canada just got absolutely smoked. It was a 100% a communist country. You know, we were placed on house arrest for 2 years. It was literally, you know, what was perceived to be Nazi Germany, where they have the papers and this and that. You couldn't get into restaurants. You're firing for your job over medical health stuff. And I was like, this is insane. Like, there's no way that this is right. There's no way that they can impose this stuff on people. What is going on? So interviewed 30 experts from around the world. And interestingly, about half of them told me the 1611 King James Bible was the contract on the planet. And I grew up a Christian and was like, you know what? Like, I kind of reject all religions. You know, it's all the same kind of deal. You know, I never really looked at the Bible or kind of gave it any um, you know, importance. I read the Bhagavad Gita, I read a lot of other spiritual books, but never that one. And so what it honestly seems to me at this point is it's a war between good and evil. You know, previously in the podcast I say, like, this is a spiritual life, it's a spiritual existence. We're between good and bad, but there's so much evidence pointing towards strong Satanism on the planet. If they believe that, they're willing to sacrifice kids, then maybe the opposite true is true. Maybe the Bible is more important than we think it is. And I'm still in my beginning phases of looking at that. But you know, with all of these different tidbits pointing to that book, it's not pointing to like the Quran, it's not pointing to the Bhagavad Gita, it's not pointing to the Buddha. It all keeps pointing back to the 1611 King James Bible, right? And now I'm going in and trying to figure out, where did that book come from? You know, does it make sense? Is it reliable? But you know, when I have, you know, over 20 people telling me stories about being in the realms of demons and Jesus is the one that saved them, and it changed their entire life, that to me is a fascinating, you know, point of information, right? When you can use the Bible and, you know, defend yourself in court, because court is also satanic. You're representing your birth certificate of Admiralty Maritime Law, right? That's why the judge is wearing a dress and he summons you from the dead, like your corporation, your corp, you know, so like your corpse essentially. And this is like a very, you know about this stuff, right? Or no?
Oh, to a certain extent, but I
Yeah, so it's pretty, again, like, and I'm not the best person sometimes to really get into the granular details, because I'll go really deep in there and I'll try to like explain so much stuff in a short period of time. But essentially, when you go to court, you're representing your birth certificate, which is a corporation. So it's like, if I, Matt Belair, created a business corporation named Matt Belair, that's what they're getting you in court to pay a fine. Everything else is God's law. God gave dominion to land, air, and water to man. And you, when you go to the court, you swear on the Bible still. And the queen and now the king swears their oath on the 1611 King James Bible to uphold that book. So when you go to court and it has to do with money, it is the law of the sea. It's Admiralty Maritime Law. So when you know, go to, you know, approach the bench, you cross that, you open the gate, that's simply boarding the ship. If you look at Italy and around the world, you look at these big court buildings, they're built as ships. The architectures are ships, and they know this. And so it's satanic in a sense, where they're using deception to take from you. So no good person goes around thinking, oh, how can I deceive and rip off and destroy someone's life and have no empathy or compassion? But part of their ethos is, if you remove all empathy and compassion, and you're a wolf and they're and everyone else is a sheep, you can do whatever you want to a person and not feel bad, right? And that's essentially, you know, what they're doing in these court systems. And when I did the law summit, what I found was that there was a lot of farmers in there, and there's a lot of people dealing with children's issues, and those are two of the worst ones. They want to control all the food, you know, all the land, all the agriculture, you know, all the means of food production. And yeah, they're just ruthless with families. And once you get into that system, you know, there's nightmare story after nightmare story. And so those were the two main groups of people in there trying to find solutions for what they were in.
well, thank you for all of that, man. It's like, where to go now, because I almost like we could say all the conspiracies connect into one conspiracy, and we could go back to Jesus and those who crucified him, and kind of see this situation, you know, like I'm saying that all the conspiracies connect to the same.
Yeah, and like, you know, like more evidence to that, like what I know, like what I know more than the Bible, right? And Jesus, because I know I'm not studied in the Bible, right? I don't know. I'm only kind of going through and watching debates and reading and listening, and starting to go down that journey. What I do know a ton about is Satanism. I know a ton about that. I know a ton about human trafficking. I know a ton about how these Hollywood celebrities sell their soul to the devil. I know a ton about the rituals they do. So if Satan isn't real, why do we have all these celebrities saying over and over, I sold my soul to the. I know someone personally who got offered that. And then there's these hearsay stories you see online. Who knows if they're valid or true? But I know personally. But you have these people who admit it. And when you go into these realms too, they say that these Satanists apparently they have to disclose what they're doing, right? So with the whole like convid scenario, they had to disclose. They told you everything. It was all out there, right? That's part of their ethos. Is that if you disclose the truth and what you're doing, then they are free from karmic repercussion. You've had a choice. They didn't impose on your free will. Now they can trick you and they can deceive you and they can do that kind of thing, but they actually tell you. So you've got all these concerts where they're like, worshiping Baal and they've got these satanic rituals. They've got these devil horns, and it's like Satanism inverting everything, right? Like, nobody cared when I was a kid if like you happened to be gay, right? Still, people don't really care about that. But the whole LGBTQ plus IA, now we're getting to the point where you're getting yelled at if you don't agree with a child, having their parts like getting castrated, right? We're at that point, right? So that to me is like pretty brutal, right? We're at a point it's like, okay, that's enough. And I said this working on human trafficking because it went into pedophilia. I said a lot of these elites are actually pedophiles. So that's another thing I know unfortunately too much about, but these people and how they operate and how they kind of scheme to do all these different things. But these pedophiles are rampant. There's a guy, a former prime minister in Australia. They had to change the legislation because they found out all this stuff that is in there. And then you say, oh well, this is crazy, right? Well, we already know now about Epstein Island, right? Now we've got Diddy. I knew this stuff before all that. So how nuts that would sound, but now the evidence is starting to come out. It's starting to come to the forefront, and that's why you have these celebrities deleting their Twitters because they have a track record from saying this stuff, right? They say pedophile comments, they say satanic comments, they state them, and we take them as a joke or whatever. But I think that part of what they're doing, they have to disclose it for some reason. And so again, if there's such a strong influence in Hollywood and in media and in music where you can sell your soul to the devil, then maybe the opposite is true, right? It makes sense. If there's no power in Satanism and you look at the Bible, it says, Satan, I'll give you the world. I'll give you all materialism. And that's why I think this world really is a battle for your soul. And I really like how Cal Washington has a very fascinating take on the Bible and what it means. He's one of the guys I had on in the Law Summit. He went to jail and had to go through all this scenario to get to where he is. But his overall take is really fascinating. Basically saying that the Bible is like a legal contract between the God and the devil. The devil made a claim that like God or that he was going to be, God, right? And so God allowed this to happen, sent him down to earth and the humans, us, because he says in the Bible is like God made man in our image. God and Satan for us to choose whether we're going to choose God or whether we're going to choose Satan, whether we're going to choose good, whether we're going to choose evil, right? And ultimately, the people will be the jury for this case that's being played out by God and Satan. And he says the book of Job, right? When he was in jail, he said, God asked Job, the devil, where were you? And he's like, I was pacing from the ends of the earth. He's like, he was in a jail cell, right? And then how he's like, all right, so Job only praises you because he has everything, right? So if you take away everything he has, he'll curse you. So he's like, okay, take away everything he has, but don't touch his body, like don't harm him, right? So he goes, okay, takes away everything he has, he doesn't curse him. So then the devil goes, oh, well, it's because you didn't let me touch his body, right? So that Cal Washington and his, again, seeing it from a law lens, say he's like, that's an appeal. He appealed to God. He's like, oh, well, if I have this appeal, right? I touch his body. Now he's going to curse you and he's going to come to my side. So he gives him sores or whatever. And he does it again. Right. And he's like, he still chooses God. So he goes, when you learn how to read the Bible from this kind of like legal construct text, it becomes a different point of view. And that's one of the more fascinating views of what is going on the planet, bringing in the Bible. Now, whether you believe in the Bible or not, the more that I get into it, it is a very central book. It's kind of gone down from the ages. It's been removed from a lot of different things. So, You look at school systems when they had the Bible and like where they are. If you look at it, and this is the other thing about Tartari, and my apologies for rambling and going from spot to spot. But if you look at the images of the 1900s and how people looked, like we're always told, like, oh, these people are primitive, they didn't have anything. But the 1900s, they have like shirts and ties, they're looking good, like life is looking good. I'm sure there's lots of places in the world where it wasn't, but there's a lot of places where everything is looking pretty good. The family unit you know, is like first and foremost, right? It's God, it's family, it's that kind of thing. And now you look at what's being pushed, right? First it was feminism to split up the family. Right now it's like all these other things. And you look at divorce and everything else, it's like, the world seems to be getting worse as we're taking those ideals away. And so again, that's I don't know, my rant, but I feel like it's very interesting to see the trajectory and the overt Satanism that has been happening around the world, and it just makes me think, you know what, maybe there is something to this book that needs to be highly considered.
Well, I got a reference, man, Revelation 3 9, which gets into Jesus calling out lies in the synagogue of Satan, saying that they say they're Jews, but they lie. And so there's that. And then what you were explaining is the revelation of the method, right? Like this idea that there's somewhat of a disclosure of what's happening. And then it's kind of like consent, like a manufacturing of consent that uh, where you subscribe to. But really, it's time to, see it for what it is and recognize we have the power. It's our collective consciousness that is creating all of this, and sometimes it can be hijacked, and that's what's going on because we have the creative power, and it's incredible. We just got to stay positive. And I hear you, man. I really enjoy Unity. I don't know if there's any Unity near you. It's a type of like positive Christianity is something that was referenced in that World War II documentary that's over 12 hours long. And so, yeah. But anyways, have you heard of Unity
I
before?
think, is it like Unity Church? If
Yeah,
it's Unity Church, it rings a bell, but
it
other
can
than
be
that, I'm
called,
not sure.
it can be called Unity Church. I like to think of it as a spiritual community. But anyways, another way is positive Christianity. And you know, yeah. I mean, I hear you. I mean, I personally don't have much experience with like astral travel or dealing with demons and things like that, but I have heard accounts just like you referenced about the name of Jesus and being able to dispel all of that. And obviously, there's a reason for that, which is kind of what we're emphasizing here, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right. And again, I don't know anything, but like maybe like I've just never heard someone say, oh man, I was in the realm of demons. And then I said the Buddha and the Buddha helped me. You know what I mean? Like it's always been that name for whatever reason. Right. So it seems to carry weight, but also from more of my knowledge, again, not knowing the Bible off the top of my heart, but understanding Satanism, I've heard and listened to these Satanist accounts saying like the power of the name Jesus protects people. So why are Satanists saying this? That's my cure. What, like I don't know enough about why it's going on, but I don't know why they're saying like that's the name. They're not saying Muhammad. They're not saying Buddha. They're not saying anyone else. They're saying yeah, Jesus is like a real pain in our butt when we're trying to do these hexes and these spells. And you have interviews. There are many interviews. For I don't know whatever my journey. I guess I've been interesting in like the darkness. I was like, why is it so bad here? Like, what the hell is actually going on? And maybe that's why I've watched so many of those. But you can watch. There are interviews with maybe in the podcast notes. I'll go through and try to find a few videos for people. But I've watched these like hour and a half videos of former Satanists, church, like lifelong Satanists telling you what they used to do in the church, what they used to believe, how they brought their kids into it and did these different things, and then talk about Jesus being a pain in the butt or flipping over and coming to the other side. But they're all referencing that, right? So again, if there's no power in it, right, then they be worried about that guy, and why they're not mentioning another name? So I do think it's like good and evil. I do know Satanists exist, right, and they do satanic ritual, and they do believe it has power. And so now I'm just curious, okay, well, what is this other side? What is actually going on with the Bible? What is going on with this character named Jesus? Was he actually a legit real guy? Is this book real, or is this book just a bunch of nonsense made up? Like I'm sure you've heard of the Council of Nicaea. Is this just like some sort of made up book from a made up guy, or is there some actual power to it? But from what I've seen so far, it does seem that there is some power to it. And the one thing I'll kind of say as a disclaimer, because I remember going into zeitgeist films, which I think are all fascinating and great, and talking about religion being the root of all evil, which I can agree to, like these religious wars to some extent. In my own journey, it's just reading the 1611 King James Bible for yourself and interpreting it for yourself. So if you do martial arts, right, you've got Mr. Miyagi and you've got the Cobra Kai, right? Same punches, same kicks, same different things, but you have to be um, your own guide on that, because I've gone to several churches as an adult, and most of the time, whether it's the Bible they're reading or sometimes the interpretation, I don't agree with at all. Right. But going to church, being around these people who have families, doing their best to try to, if you look at the book and, it says what it says about, your neighbor, loving your neighbor, stuff like that, they're trying their best. But it doesn't mean I believe every single thing everyone says. There's so many differing opinions. And one idea that stuck out to me about let's say the corruption of churches or the error of churches is that it's such a high ideal. No one can live up to the ideal of Jesus being sinless. If indeed he was real, he walked the planet and did all the things that he claimed to do. No one can live up to that ideal, right? It's too hard. So then alone, a group of people, every group of people I've been in, even for a worthy cause, whether it was when I helped for about a year to start this like sustainable village city, basically kind of like what your spaceship in, it's going to be like a permanent Burning Man. We'll figure out our own crops. Like we had the whole thing mapped out. It was like a whole year project. It's a whole nightmare of a scenario of trying to get people to work together. You know what I mean? Everybody had a positive intent, but was there like nonsense and arguments and people being petty and immature all over the place? Then I studied with a Native American elder. Same thing. Everybody with this same positive intent to try to help people get back together, do good and have these grand ideas. It was just again just a bunch of like, people, probably including myself, who just couldn't get along and couldn't really get it together, and we're just being very immature in a lot of different ways, right? So I feel like, looking at the churches, if we're going to put them in there, they're subject to having those people. But if we look at the book and we just try to learn from that book, it can be a good guide. So what Cal Washington would say is like, everybody has an opinion on the Bible, but no one's read it. And so when I get these verses, I try to find these understanding. There's a lot in there about evil, a lot in there about Satan and how he runs the world and this and that. How, you got to watch out for materialism. And there's a lot of it I don't really understand yet. But it's been a very deep and fascinating exploration so far.
Well, I mean, to continue with that, I mean, with Bible Gateway, it's pretty interesting when we think about the history of biblical scholarship, right? And to utilize things like Bible Gateway and so on, to really try to study the Bible. Uh,
Yeah, for sure. And one actually interesting tidbit that goes back to the Tartaria stuff. Have you touched on Tartaria at your podcast at all?
a little bit, yes. I mean, I've Old World Florida. I don't know if you've seen his channel. He doesn't outright talk about Tartaria, but it's a little emphasis on the old world and sometimes that term being interchangeable, with Tartaria, the old world.
Gotcha. Well, the first I'll give it some resources for some guys who do some great videos. There's a guy named John Levy, Jon
Yep.
Levi on YouTube. Really great breakdowns of a lot of different stuff. There's Iwaranon. You have to find him, Ewaranon. He's on Rumble and BitChute. Really great documentary series. And the Improbable Dreamer. He's another great resource. He's on Instagram and TikTok. So a lot of great, fascinating videos for you to kind of uncover. My understanding or hypothesis of what Tartaria is as of now, it's something along the lines of when I went to Egypt, I had no idea how we had all these other sacred, you call them sacred sites, you call them megalithic sites all over the world, right? I thought it was like Egypt and maybe a handful of others. There's these sites all over the world where we have no idea how they're built. When I was there with the Resonance Science Foundation, engineers, astrologists, every, highly intelligent person under the sun. And it was just a bunch of theory of how they are built. They don't know with the architecture and the engineering and the laser cutting and the just everything. It's just so you can only hypothesize. So you've got all those sites, but then we look at these old construction buildings. So you look at mainly the cathedrals. You've got the same cathedrals in Quebec, Canada that you all over the United States, that you do in Paris, that you do in Rome, that you do in Europe, and then you've even got this this Gothic cathedrals in China. What are they doing in China? That doesn't make any sense. They're built so incredibly advanced. And one sign of that is the church windows when you use cymatics, which is the visual representation of sound and frequency. So you play these different frequencies on a sanding plate or in water, and at certain notes, right, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is all kind of sand, all scattered. Then you get up to 432, and it's a perfect pattern. It's a perfect geometric pattern. Then you keep going up and up and up, and it's all sand. And then boom, you get to a higher note, whether it's 620, 632, 28, whatever the case is. Then it becomes a more advanced geometric pattern. Well, when you know it, these old cathedrals that were supposed to be built in the Stone Ages by primitive people, those patterns match the cathedral windows perfectly, absolutely perfectly. So we know that the construction is advanced. When I was in Egypt, there was a place called Saqqara. The guides told us it was the old hospital. It's this big wall, right? And it had these squares in it. And the guide said, stick your head in the wall. You're going to feel something, right? So we're like, all right. So you obviously go up, and there's just like these little squares all along this big, huge, long wall. And there's maybe, I don't know, 100 or so, maybe more. Stick your head in the wall, and then you can have this visceral sound and vibration coming from the wall, just going womp 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 womp, like a seashell all around, but more intense. You take your head out of the place and you stick it in, and you feel it again. So whatever energy or vibration that was going on in that place is still there, right? So you look at when I was in Italy, they have these fountains, these beautiful fountains, right, with these you know geez, what do you call them? Just like beautiful designs, right at the top of mountains that run water 24 hours a day, all day, every day, and they don't stop. Right, so they built these years and years ago, and like now in our cities, we don't even have clean water anywhere. So how are they running clean water from these just simple designs all over the planet? So the idea with Tartaria, the idea is that how did we get these either Gothic cathedrals or Roman architecture all over the world? Like in the middle of Winnipeg, Canada, I had recently come back from Italy, and they have this like courthouse that you could have put right beside the cathedral in Rome, and you wouldn't even think, you'd think of land there perfectly. So, um, yeah. So why is that happening? And then one of the theories is that when you look at the dates on these cathedrals, the one kind of looks like a J, and if you look at these kind of older buildings, they would used to say like after death or before death, basically when Jesus was crucified. So if you take away the one, it's basically rather than being 1800 AD, it's actually 800 AD. And one of the theories is like there's this missing 1,000 years where they're just adding 1,000 years to really make you confused about where you are. And I feel like that's one of the main goals of Satanism. And I know this from hypnosis. If you look at a documentary called Century of Self by Edward Bernays, and you study hypnosis, you got to first make somebody confused. So the whole gender thing, right? If you come out, you don't know if you're a man or a woman. How the heck are you going to know you're a perfect divine being created by God for a purpose, and everything you do matters, right? You just confuse first. So I'm going to shut up because I did an epic rant that kind of went 10 different ways. I hope it wasn't too confusing, and there's some useful tidbits in there.
Well, it's spot on. I mean, I just learned about him. For those who don't know, Mark Gruber, right?
Gober.
Grober. Yeah, I mean, because everything, I think his 7 books, it's all about inversion, because you're hitting the nail on the head. That's what it's about, like this inversion. And I mean, I guess we might as well get there when it comes to our worldview and where are we right now, and that relation of how a worldview can be inverted, and this idea of confusion. And without, rambling, that's the essence of communism, Marxism, Karl Marx, uh, basically accuse your enemy of what you're guilty of while you're doing it to seed confusion, and it's just like too much because of that. So I really see how, kind of like what I said earlier, all the different conspiracies can really be seen as just one, and we can connect it to the same group that crucified Jesus. And luckily I do believe we have the upper hand, having informed conversations like this, and being able to accurately identify the problem, right?
Yeah, for sure. And well, that you hit a very important point that I was discussing, right? So it was confusion, right? And also Satanism is inverting. It's inverting everything, right? So they take, who you are, like on that birth certificate, right? So you think you're going in there as Matt Belair. You're not. You're going in there as a corporation of Matt Belair. So it's same, but different, but they've kind of not inverted, but they've confused the situation, right? And so if you want to lead someone in hypnosis, you first confuse them, then you can take them and lead them. And if you don't know who and what you are, if you're not connected to God, or yourself or truth in any kind of way, then you're going to believe anything and can be led to believe anything. And, it's very important to kind of have some sort of semblance of truth. But if all you've ever known is a lie, it's really tough to kind of get to that grounding, perspective and to be able to guide yourself and to guide your life. And over the last 4 years, I've been, this, I have a really big podcast, 600 episodes. I'm currently still top 0.5% in the world, 1% just because of how many shows I've done, but I haven't done it in a year. But 4 years ago with the COVID stuff, I just got deleted, getting 150,000 downloads a month, all the way down to 3,000. So that was the start of like crushing my business, right? So they go after your wallet. Then they deleted my Instagram, which had about 60,000 people on it. Which was a bummer because that's where I was able to generate business and do, my coaching programs or whatever I had to offer, right? So it was a really good business generator, but it also had all my memories on it. It also had all my travels, all the people I trained with, all the different experiences I had and I wrote about. So they deleted that. That was just kind of a personal bummer. So they just kind of like start to eliminate, right, any other side. And it wasn't just my podcast, right? It was anybody, right? And they deleted entire platforms. So if you can't find the truth, how are you supposed to investigate both sides and deliberate, right, and use critical thinking and find the truth, right? So not only do they try to invert it, right, like just like the whole convid thing, it's like, okay, if we go forward 10 years from now and they do delete all the things and you can't find any of the documentaries and all the stuff, um, how are you going to know what actually happened? You know what I mean? You won't know, right? And even I used to be able to find all these documentaries on different subjects before COVID. I can't even find all these documentaries, whether they were on health or whether they were on Satanism, whether they old interviews like William Cooper stuff, right? Former CIA agent, right? Who kind of exposed a lot of this stuff, right? They're much harder to find now because they've deleted entire platforms and they delete those things, right? So obviously if you're a side that's trying to delete all of this information, there's a reason to it and there's a power to it. But one of the things I want to touch on was you said, yeah, I think we have the upper hand. When I go back to the Bible and was having a rough time, and that's only one shitty thing that's happened over the last few years. It says in the Bible 365 times, apparently, do not fear, right? You wrestle against principalities of the spirit and not flesh and blood or something like that. And there's all these references that to me, when I look at what's going on and I don't understand this world, I was like, well, when I look at it from a biblical perspective and it says like, hey, this world is evil and it's kind of run by Satan, but you don't have to worry about that because if you choose, life of good and God and Christ and all that kind of stuff, then you're totally fine. But it is going to be hard. It's not some sort of like hunky dory roller coaster that's all easy. It's just like you're going to be able to get through it. And I feel like more and more people are waking up to like these evils that are going on and saying no, and then it's going to flip to the other side where we can start working together, starting to have these principles. They don't even have to come from the Bible, but they're in there, like loving your neighbor, working together, sharing the truth, making sure everybody's taken care of, but ultimately exposing evil because the current evil paradigm has just so much power and influence, right? So if we can start to mitigate that and equal the playing field, it'll just be pretty obvious like who you want to hang out with, who you want to be around, right? And who you don't.
Well, let's get into it, man. So I see it as top priority number one, transitioning to a voluntarily based society, volunteerism, permaculture based. I think we've talked about Jones Plantation, right? You've seen that?
Yeah.
What?
You sent it to me, but I forget it.
So, do you know about Larkin Rose? Does that ring a bell? So he wrote
No.
a book, "The Most Dangerous Superstition," which gets into the myth of authority, but it focuses on government. And so then Jones Plantation is a way to illustrate that the illusion of voting and like only slaves are voting for their, slave masters, and to realize the progression of slavery going from brute force to control to psychological manipulation.
Mm.
Just to realize, the path forward, which tends to be, in my opinion, volunteerism, stateless society. It's kind of like history repeats itself. If we really try to envision whatever Tartaria was, like, do we think there was a centralized state, that was making sure there was, building code adherence and so,
Mhm.
you know,
Yeah, I think we could ultimately get to um, that worldview. Shoot, I had something and then I blanked on it. Oh yeah, Michael Tellinger reminds me of him. One Small Town, where he has a kind of idea for that, and I think we'll be able to get to that. And I think it's a good opportunity to aim for. And one of the things that I've changed my perspective on a little bit after a lot of years of, like, let's say, trying to change the world or do, if I had a button to shut off human trafficking after maybe the 3 years of working to bring awareness to it, I would. Ultimately, I have to give the world is up to God, right? It's up to the creator. I can't make anyone or anyone else do anything. So more and more as I get older, it seems to be the best way to be helpful is to be the best example of what it is you want to see in the world. And what I like about becoming a father, which before I was like a single guy and podcasting and traveling and had a different view of the world. And now that I'm a dad, the most important thing for me is to be a good father, to be a good husband, to have a good household, to be a good neighbor. And a lot of those are very simple things to do, right? So, on the grand scheme, I want the world to be a much better place. And I'm all for signing up for those ideas and being constructive of those ideas. And ultimately, I think a lot of people get too locked in and confused on the big ideals and they can't even do the simple ones. So I think those ones are going to take care of themselves as we become the better examples. You know what I mean? So I believe that we'll get to what you're saying. And I think they already had it in Tartaria. I think they had free energy. When you go down those rabbit holes and you look at them, it does look like, that architecture is set up for electricity and harnessing the ether. And then there's references to old books basically saying the ether can create energy similar to, a fish is unaware that it's in water. This ether, or like this space or air around us, that actually can be used to charge and create electricity. And that was the main theme in Egypt when I was there. They're like, we don't know exactly how this worked, but it does seem like everything's set up from an electrical engineering standpoint to create some sort of energy. And so if we have free energy, if we have systems in place where we have food, like if they wanted us to have free food, you can just line cities up, right, with, trees and fruits and everything, and everybody would participate. But it's set up in a way that we are, competitive, that we're destructive, that we're very confused, so we can be led into the architecture of a world that these, whether you call them elite or these people of influence, want. And that's what they want. They want dominion over the world. They want total control. Their goal from the beginning was a one world government, one world religion, one world currency, right? But a normal person doesn't desire to, have the entire world, right? It's nuts. So that's what their goal is. And our goal is not that. So I feel like they definitely won't win because it's too crazy, it's too audacious, and we have God and we have goodness on our side. And as we just kind of become more aware of what is happening, it's going to fall more and more apart. But in the meantime, we're in the shit, like we're in the storm. I don't think we're in the, like, we're in the battle. And in Canada, it was interesting because you see people in freedom, like in the States, Montana had some people there, Florida, whatever. Those are great ideals when you're in freedom. When you're in communism and you're getting effed over, what you're trying to do is you're just trying to survive. right? It's like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like you can't go into actualization when you're literally just, you're under house arrest and you're just trying to like manage. You can try to have the best mindset you can, but you're in a different battle in that point, right? So yeah, I don't know. Again, another rant.
Well, I mean, hopefully the future is bright. I mean, I'm thinking of what's called the Greater Reset. I'm sure you've heard of that. That's like,
Yeah. Mhm.
the counter to the Great Reset. Because we do see it. I mean, we're on the brink of it, and I just feel like, thank God, there's enough of us that are really working towards freedom to not allow this subversion of our freedom and what we would call the Great Reset, right? Reset. And whether AI has been here a long time or what, but this idea of AI somewhat, enslaving us and social credit system, central bank digital currency, and complete totalitarian nightmare. But some could argue that we already are experiencing this to a certain extent because of the nation of Israel somewhat occupying the majority of countries throughout the world. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think you're right. Like I think my perspective is they have a plan, and I don't think it's working. I think it's fallen on its head, and it's the last grasps of what they're able to do. But because of their mindset and how they work, they're going to bring as much down with them as they can. So you've got mass immigration going on in the U.S. It's a war tactic, right? It's to destabilize things. Being a Canadian, Canadian versus US is like we're always giving you grief, Canadian, US is the worst, blah blah blah, whatever the case is. Over COVID, I realized the setup in the United States is the absolute best. You're so lucky. You have all these checks and balances for what you have as a country. If you did not exist, we would already be in totalitarianism. We already have the one world government, right? Your right to bear arms is the reason why there is no totalitarianism. Because if there is freedom there, if there is truth in the States, they can have every other country in the world, but they don't have yours. So as Canada looks on and being like, okay, Florida's open, we're dealing with this, like what's going on there, right? There's this discrepancy. All the world looks and is like, you have these independent states that are almost like independent countries, right? Where you could have, okay, I want this, or so you go to this state. Well, I don't want that. I'm going to go to this other state. It's the total opposite. Canada got one blanket communism. We were all locked down. We were all screwed. We all got the same thing. Same with Australia, New Zealand, all like a lot of Europe, right? But the states kind of stood strong. And so you can't conquer the states, right? Because of your First Amendment, it's impossible. You could say, Biden could go, okay, you know what? We've lost to China. The boats are pulling up. Everybody put down your arms. You still can't conquer the states. Every old lady has a gun. Good luck. You have to like either blow it all to smithereens, right? Or you have to subvert it with what they're doing through the education system, through the media, through mass immigration, through all these different tactics. You cannot. What is that? NASA weapons for silent wars, this old document. And even when you have these old ones, and again, these are all old interviews, whether it's Bill Cooper or different variety of ways that I've heard it, they're like, the states is the issue, right? They have to conquer the states or they get nothing. And they've like been trying to figure that out for a long, long time. So you guys are kind of like the model for better or worse, but because you're the model, you're also the target, right? Because you're the issue, right? You can't bring in this whole new world order scenario with you guys being free and having people doing whatever you want, right? When the World Health Organization said everybody locked down, right? Well, some states said, well, you don't apply to us, right? But every country that signed up under Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum, they all just compliant, right? These world agencies and the world police, like the United Nations, right? They have no jurisdiction in the U.S. And even if they did, again, you can defend yourself. So the way that your country is set up is truly amazing. I think people really in the States, they need to get back to honoring what your country is as like a beacon of hope and what is possible. As a Canadian, that's hard for me to say, but I can say for sure after going through COVID, all the checks and balances you have there, as far as any system that's available, it is by far greater than anything else. Never lose your right to bear arms. They tried to take away free speech. It didn't work. And now they're going to grasp on every single thing that they can do to kind of tear it down, but it's all going to unravel because they couldn't get it right. They shot their shot. They went all out and it's slowly going to unravel, and everything will get better, and all the pieces will come together. Like even Trump getting in place, whether you like him or not, or agree with him or not, or maybe whatever the case is, the second he's going to go put a tariff, because I'm wondering in Canada we've had mass immigration. It's caused a whole bunch of problems here for a variety of different ways. Um, he's like, we're going to give you a tariff because mass immigration also brings huge human trafficking. So when Trump first got in, I didn't care about politics, and I still really don't. I kind of laughed because I thought it was funny because everyone was like giving him a grief. Like I didn't know, right? I was like, oh, they like that guy got in. That's crazy. But in working in human trafficking, within the first few months, he signed in all these laws where the group I was working with was like, no, this is great. Like he's actually done a whole bunch to limit human trafficking by all these laws or whatever he set up. And then the second he got out of office, whatever Biden did, human trafficking and missing kids and everything like that went crazy through the roof through what his legislation was. So one of the things he's like said to, Mexico and Canada, knock it off or I'm going to do a tariff. And there's a lot of people coming through. There's a ton of human trafficking coming through the border. So that's just one, you know, positive influence of what's going to happen if we can get those borders secure. And then getting in, I don't know, just step by step, looking at solutions for these problems that we have.
I hear you, man. I mean, I guess I have to bring up, I mean, you're touching on the human trafficking. I mean, so, for those who aren't aware yet, I'm sure you are, there's adrenochrome, and allegedly the molecule looks like a rabbit. So it's the idea. I mean, are you familiar with this? The Matrix, follow the white rabbit.
I've heard adrenochrome. I've just never heard that it looked like a rabbit. But there's definitely a lot of evidence to say that that's actually a real thing. And when I was doing the human trafficking, there were people who discussed being in those scenarios and seeing those different things of like, apparently you need to scare the crap out of the kid, right? And then it changes the blood. So it's pretty horrible stuff. But again, I try to look at everything objectively. But when I see like 5, 10, 15, pieces of evidence, looking through is like, what is very plausible. I don't know for sure, but we do have a lot of like evidence going this way. You know what I mean? And there's a lot of references. So yeah, like if it is that bad, right? I do know they're killing kids. I do know they're actual pedophiles, right? For sure. There's like, was it like 40 million people are estimated at human trafficking, the last stats that I looked up. And again, anything I say or anyone else's, look it up, do your own research, figure it out, right? I just kind of, I'll take like a 10-hour documentary and then I'll like synthesize into like a few paragraphs that I'm trying to wrap my own head around. But the last I looked, it was like 38,000 kids a year go missing in Canada, just vanish. Imagine my kid just vanishing. Where the F do they go? 80,000 in the States. So if it's that many people, there must be some system set up. And then again, if this is like so much for you to handle, like we already know now. Look at Epstein's Island. They were caught for the most heinous crimes, but yet we don't even know what's going on there. Why? Because it's all connected to elites. So why are elites all pedos? Apparently, this one whistleblower testimony that I watched, and I know a little bit of this from the Law Summit too, where they go in ranks. So like whether there's secret societies or whatever, they start low, right? You know how they have these levels, like levels of masonry, levels of things like that. They start pretty low to get you in, right? And then they start to do things to like test you, right? Test your moral compass, and it gets slowly worse. They start to erode that moral compass. You do a little bit more wrong, you do a little bit more wrong, you do a little bit more wrong, a little bit more evil, and whatever. Right? Just like kind of slowly builds you up. And apparently, the very end of it is killing a kid. This is what the guy says, right? He's like, that's where apparently he got to. This is his testimony, and there's other people that say the same thing. But the very end is like, he's like, I just broke down in tears. You know what I mean? And left. And that's why you have all these like weird blood oaths and this super secret and stuff like that. That's apparently the very end of it. And there's enough evidence that I've seen to make me think it's very plausible, if not likely, that they're actually doing that, right? And that's why they're so impacted by this. And again, you might think it's crazy. We look at Epstein Island. We look at like survivor reports. We look at these the evidence is overwhelming. And when you look at the formula for truth, or I had Tom Campbell on a couple of times, one of the leading physicists in simulation theory, very smart guy, right? And he's just like, he's like, you just take it as a bit of evidence, and over, and that evidence starts to pile up. It really starts to point in a direction, right? It doesn't mean like, okay, this is for sure. It means like, if you can show me another piece of evidence that takes away all that evidence and now it's a new direction, great, that's fine. But it does look like there's just an astronomical amount of evidence in that way. And so we have to like consider that. And um, there's a great book that's called um, Why Evil Matters, How Science and Religion Flubbed a Big One. I think his name is Michael Sakaris, something like that. He's a guy on my podcast years ago. He is super analytical. Um, and I remember at the start of this podcast, he's telling me about, he's like, if we know, this is how we started. He goes, if we know there's people out there that are torturing children, okay? And he's like, the reason they're torturing them is they're trying to put them into such a state of mind that they're so broken that their personality splits. If they're so broken, their personality splits, then they can try to get this demon to enter the kid. This is how he starts my show. And this guy's very analytical, not like you and I kind of going down these rabbit holes looking, right? He's like, not, he doesn't believe anything. Oh yeah, he has a podcast called Skeptical. Okay, he's skeptical of everything. Right? He's like, if we know that exists, we have to first find out if that's actually true, like if demons are actually coming in. Right. So this is how he starts the podcast. 30 minutes, 40 minutes into the podcast, I was saying something like, yeah, if you have a dream, you can design that, dream and like work towards it and make it a reality. He's like, oh no, I was like, that's nonsense, man. He's like, you got to get a job. You know what I mean? You got to pay the bills. And I was like, wait, 30 minutes ago, you're talking about, believing people are torturing kids to split their personalities for demons to get into them. You believe that, but you can't believe somebody can design their own future and like live a life of their dreams. I was like, that's crazy, dude. So, he's super skeptical. And, so again, like it's another really good piece of evidence by people who look into this. They're coming to the same conclusions. And to go on a little bit of a tangent, I know you've covered a little bit of flat Earth. I don't know if the Earth is flat or round. When I went into the first time I applied to the formula for truth was a guy he's like, oh yeah, it's like after I left contact in the desert in the States, this interesting guy, and he's got this like his own little setup at a motel that's got all this healing stuff, hyperbaric chamber, crystal salts, things like that. He's kind of like this like big Indian guy, kind of 6'2". He's always lubed up. He's got long hair. He's going around the hotel lubed up. He's just like quite the character. He's like, the earth's flat, right? He's like, is it? He's like, yeah. I was like, I don't think so. It's like, I was like, why do you think it's flat? And so then 2 hours later, we're going through videos, busting this stuff up, and I was like, holy crap. I was like, I don't know if it's flat, man, but like you just taught me so much stuff I don't know. I learned so much stuff I did not know. That just is what it is, whether the shape of the world is flat or not. So then, I had David Weiss on my podcast. He's a big flat earther. And then I watched him go around all my buddies, right? They couldn't answer the same question. Like, you know what? Like, we're going to have to start giving this some thought. Like, what's going on here? And going down that rabbit hole, I learned more things that were not true that I would have never learned if I didn't kind of go down that rabbit hole. COVID made me learn more about health than I ever would have, not going down all those rabbit holes through necessity. But I remember like, it's probably like a year and a half of like seeing enough videos looking. It's like, I think it's more likely the earth is flat and we're in a firmament, which is also in the Bible. And you talk about satanic inversions. And then made me realize like when you are a Satanist, you want to invert everything. So Satanist wants you to believe it's whatever the Big Bang is, millions and millions of years ago, Big Bang happens, then you're a monkey in evolution, things like that. You're floating around a ball in infinite outer space forever, right? Well, if you want to think that you're insignificant, that what you do doesn't matter, that you're just a blip in this and literally you don't matter, anything you ever do will just be this tiny little speck of time, just couldn't be any more significant, that's the worldview for you. So if you want people to sin, to commit crime, to not care, to have no moral value, to have no moral compass, that's a perfect worldview. But if you were created by God and you were put in a world that's got a firmament on it and you can't get out, and you're a divine being created by God, every single thing you do matters. You know what I mean? You are so, so important. It's, it's such a different worldview. And I remember that clicking like, holy, if kids were taught that, how much, more responsible would they be? How much more would they, feel empowered? How much more would they want to do the right thing, to know that they were created by a divine being and everything, that, they are a part of that same divine being, right? It's a very, very different worldview, right? So again, that's a satanic inversion, right? Earth is flat, Earth is round. And again, I don't know, but I've seen enough evidence that the spinning ball theory to me is a bunch of nonsense. NASA is like, nonsense. Like, just look at NASA and how much money do they get a day? Do you know? It's like, it's an absurd number. You guys can look it up. It's like millions and millions. You're on mute on. It's crazy, right? It's
80
absurd.
a day, something
A
like that.
day?
Yeah.
It's so nuts.
You see
Good.
Fly to the Moon with Scarlett Johansson.
Which
Uh,
one?
it's called Fly Me to the Moon. So
Uh-uh.
I think it was produced by Apple, but anyways, Scarlett Johansson, she was like Lucy, if you ever saw that movie.
I like that movie.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's interesting, like the idea of revelation of the method, like we mentioned earlier. So basically, the film talks about how, as a backup, they needed to film a fake landing of the moon. So they
Mm,
kind of play it off as like they landed on the moon, but simultaneously they were faking it. And,
mhm.
no matter what, it was somewhat of a victory to have it be mainstream, normalizing. But really, it's like, it just seems embarrassing to even talk about because just a little bit of critical thought about the whole moon landing, everything falls apart. But it's cognitive dissonance and propaganda.
Yeah, and it's like you only know the worldview you're in. And I feel like I read something recently that went along the lines is like, if let's say our generation, like my generation, knew boys were boys and girls were girls. Like we just knew that. It was just the way it was. You know what I mean? If you wore a dress as a dude, you can, right? But you can't chop off your parts and call yourself a girl. Like that's just not how it works. You know what I mean? So you go to the next generation, you're like, oh no, you know what? Boys can be girls and girls can be boys. Then all of a sudden you get to the third or fourth generation, it becomes normalized. They're so far from what the truth is and what's going on. They can't even find it. And so for us, we're given this worldview, right? And we're taught it. And in our education system, it's the Prussian system of rote memorization, right? You don't get rewarded for critical thinking. You get rewarded for not asking questions, sitting down and shutting the hell up and regurgitating what they tell you, right? And that's, we look at the highest levels of academia, it's the same thing, right? They're not teaching us to think critically. They're doing it on purpose. So, right, so you're very rigid in that worldview. And I saw that through, the COVID scenario. A lot of good friends. I lost most of my good friends from that. They knew I podcasted for years. They knew I traveled. They knew I was open minded. They know I'm a compassionate person. They know, you can have an open discussion with me. Not one of them had an open discussion. Just the second, I always knew, right? Because the television would tell them what to do, and they did it. They were fully under hypnosis. The second they said, stop talking to your friends who, are spreading these woeful conspiracies, all the conversation stopped right then. It was unbelievable, right? So they were just under hypnosis, and that was their worldview. But now, hopefully, like you said, I think what's happening is now more people are going to wake up. Like it's just going to be a slower process. I 100% believe we're going to get to that world that you're moving towards, that you're playing your part in, that you're doing your best to articulate, to talk about, to bring about. It's going to happen. For me being in the space for a long time, now I'm old and cranky. I think I'm at, once you're at 40, I'm getting to old and cranky. Um, it's just going to happen slower. Remember to be the absolute beacon, to be the best example, be a part of any solution that you see. But also, one thing that was really tough for me growing up is putting the whole world on my shoulders. I still kind of do. I want everything fixed. I want it all to stop. I want it all to be better. But you do that, you're gonna end up. It's too much, right? But if you can just be a good person, my suggestion. I've read countless spiritual books. I would go with the 1611 King James Bible and give it a little bit of credence. After how 30, like I'm 40, right? I just only started really even giving it an idea at 40. So why, right? And now as I'm looking into it, I was like, you know what? This book has a lot more credibility than I thought. And I think there's an agenda about why people don't, and you could just read it just to read it. You don't have to believe it. But it explains a lot of evil. A lot of the other books don't explain evil the same way. The Bhagavad Gita goes into it a little bit too, about like Arjuna and stuff like that. But going into the Bible versus that, the meat and potatoes are very different of that book. And, it's just a good guide. So to be your own example, maybe, give it a benefit of the doubt of like an idea. Because whenever I'm like, okay, I want the Bible to reference this thing, usually it can give me a few verses that I find helpful. And not every teacher's the same, right? I've been to a bunch of different churches. I watch a bunch of people's different perspective on different verses and all this kind of stuff. A lot of it I don't agree with. And then I go into, my own interpretation of reading the verse, and then people that I feel like have a good grasp on it and ask their opinion, and then I'm able to find some wisdom. And often at my point in life, I've gone through a very dark season. It's just some peace and contentment and solace. I've had a very blessed life for 36 years. And then the last four have just been an absolute butt kicking. And, so it's been very helpful in that challenging time anyway, for me as a resource.
Well, that's nice, man, and all the solidarity that provides too, for so many people. And trying to reflect, man. I mean, I think I've shared with you, I have a good friend who's into A Course in Miracles, and we don't have to really get into this too much, but he believes Jesus dictated A Course in Miracles. It's like the third testament, basically. And he views the Bible as like a wheat and tear situation of like there's certain um, untruth in the Bible and to filter it out with the truth. It's like a debate between two opposing thought systems. So no matter what, I mean, I think it's unique, all the different ways people interpret it. And then personally, myself, I mean, there's only so much time. There's only so much time we have right now. But to really like simultaneously dig into the history of the Bible, the history of Christianity, the historicity, the historiography, like of how the history has even been kept track of and recorded, and there's that. And I want to just emphasize, like, with what you're saying about worldview, because when I started this podcast, man, I mean, worldview is really what it's all about. And I haven't really expanded on it in any of the episodes because, I mean, truthfully, that's what I've been really aspiring for, man, is having an accurate and comprehensive worldview. Because I think you're aware with Foster Gamble, his film Thrive, he talks about the 12 sectors and then the 13th, worldview, and that like worldview is the most important, like everything comes from that. And just then, the realization we're spiritual beings having a human experience. So like we can evaluate our worldview, and we can really like aspire towards research and acquiring knowledge and truth seeking to really, do our best to have this accurate worldview. So thank you so much, for your time and emphasis on that. And then even the Bible, and like I'm alluding to with the history of Christianity and the Bible and all of it, hand in hand. But just, man, I can tell you've definitely been through a lot, and just a little bit that you've shared with me, personally, just somewhat of this journey from the new age to, following Jesus. And it's powerful, right?
Yeah, it's been interesting, and huge shout out to Foster Gamble and Kimberly Gamble, two very wonderful, beautiful people. I actually met them when I went to Egypt with the Resident Science Foundation. So they were there, and they're two genuine people who are seeking solutions. And I feel like um, anyone of any background or circumstance or belief can have that worldview of trying to build a better place, of trying to be a better person, whatever reference point that can come from. Referencing the Bible, this is again like my own beginning. I want to know, where does this book come from? Is this full of nonsense? In my little bit of experience so far, like, looking at these biblical scholars, like apparently there's more written on Jesus and Alexander the Great, and apparently like these books, like they're going through and they're all written, and then they're translating them. And then you go to the 1611 King James Bible. I just watched a 2-hour documentary on that, where it's showing you like, these are the documents we took it from. We translated it here. We already had an accurate translation. And then the King James or whatever got all these different scholars to go together, said don't change them at all, just change what's going to be necessary, and had all these different scholars go back and forth to create that book. And that's why it's the most important one. And the U's and V's are switched. And even in new Bibles, that's why I'm like, when I go to church and they're using some sort of like different translation, I have mine and I read mine versus what they're reading. I was like, this is so watered down. You know what I mean? It's like, this is like the difference between a straight shot of like delicious top of the line whiskey and like, I don't know, whiskey filled with like, 2 liters of water. Like, it's barely the same. Right. So I have my own issues with a lot of it. But that book is very fascinating. The more I look into it, there's a book I'm going to get into now called The Case for Christ. And apparently it's this like New York Times author that went to discredit the book because his wife became a Christian. Like, okay, I'm going to go research and discredit it. And then he ends up becoming a Christian. So again, it's like all these, I know the Satanism side. Right now, I'm trying to educate myself on, is this book great or is it full of nonsense? And it's just like the flat earth stuff. Look at Mark Gober. That guy is so smart. He's like a Princeton. He won't play himself up, but when you get him on the podcast, if you go look, check out Mark Gober. He's a champ. The guy's so damn smart. He's written a bunch of books. He's like this scholar that woke up. You know what I mean? He's like that guy who's going to win the chess club, then he's on the tennis team, and then he's going to out debate you, and then he's going to create this master thesis. He's just so friggin' brilliant. So then when he researches something, he knows his shit. And so he goes through and he does like an end upside down thinking. That's him writing a book on him waking up, essentially, right? Then he writes one on health, and then he wrote one on UFOs. Right? I was like, and then I was like, hey, you ever looked into flat Earth? I was like, you would be a gangster if you wrote a book on. Like, I didn't think he was going to do it,
Oh,
right?
it's crazy, man. Because
I didn't think because most people don't want to touch it,
it all comes,
right?
like what I was saying, his 7 books, it seems like you got to read all of them together. So I started the one on contact, is Audible, but I'm so grateful because, like you're saying, you just recommended it, and I try to act fast. You know what I mean? Because it's
Mm-hmm.
such a privilege, to just be here and aspire towards learning and solutions and connection and everything, man. And just want to thank you again, for your courage and just everything. Because I know it took a while for me to thank you, or at least let you know when you mentioned Tartaria, and then I spoke with you a few months ago after I checked out what I believe is like the most Tartarian building in Florida, the University of Tampa, the building that it's in.
All
And
the universities,
no
all the churches. Yeah.
pictures of the construction, but it makes no sense. I mean, without me going on, it's like the president of Turkey, I think 10 years ago, made a statement about, Muslims being in America in the 1100s, there being certain contracts. Then you have this Moorish architecture style building in Tampa area, and we're told it's one of the largest hotels in North America in the late 1800s. I mean, stuff this doesn't add up, but
Yeah, and who was the architect? Why? Okay, now they're Muslims in Morris there, but then who built them in Canada? Who built them in other states? None of the stories are congruent. Nobody knows what's going on. Like there's one John Levy has when I was in Ottawa, Canada. They have some absurdly incredible buildings, including our parliament, right? Apparently, the time they were built, there was like the Ottawa was 10,000 people on a dirt horse and buggy road. So all these 10,000 people are like, you know what? Eff it. Let's just build this unbelievably ornate, beautiful masterpiece of buildings for no effing reason as we're, over here in our crappy little houses. Like they were either pre-built or and then Tartari gets into some interesting stuff of like babysitting and very fascinating
well,
things like,
repopulation, right? Like there's a repopulation or something with
yeah. Hmm.
I mean, the orphan trains and the fact that
Yeah.
it was just barely over 100 years ago, babies could be shipped through the mail. I mean, it was pretty.
Like the Cabbage Patch Kids. I just saw that one. I don't know, but now I always reference it back to the Bible because again, like not to beat a dead horse with it, but going through Burning Man, having people who've had these demonic experiences, going through all the stuff that I used to believe, in that thing, and then referencing to the Bible. A lot of those people that I used to go, they're now Christians and they have nice families, right? So one of the things I used to think was like, oh yeah, you go around and you're single and this and that or whatever. Never in music growing up or in the Burning Man scene or whatever did they ever value family. It was never like family as the top, and it goes God, family in the Bible. Strong families make strong communities, strong neighbors, strong nations, what I mean, strong cities. It's just so simple, but you're just like missing the boat so hard, you know what I mean? It's like the value of having a family, being a good husband, being a good father, raising the next generation, being an honorable person. It's all in there. Right. And I totally missed the boat on that. And a lot of these people, they have great families. They're reasonably happy. They're dealing with life just like everybody else. But now you're kind of seeing these same things with just a totally different lens. But okay, I think God or whoever let me try every other thing to see that it was like empty. You know what I mean? Like I got to do everything I wanted. I got to travel the world, meditate with monks, train with Shaolin monks, try every single spiritual practice, you know what I mean? Every single thing under the sun. And it never like fully completed me or fulfilled me in some sort of way. I'm still searching. So in that search, it's kind of finally left me to the last stone. And I'm at the last stone. There's no more. This doesn't work. I'm screwed. You know what I mean? So hopefully we'll see if it works out. Check in 5, 10 years or whatever. But that's currently where I am, and I've seen it be very helpful. But it's a level of, I don't even say maturity. I'm old now. I'm old and I'm cranky. I'm 40. I've tried everything. I got to just still figure out what's going on in this world. Still try to figure out a way to create solutions to make a positive impact. But now that I'm being a father, the highest ideal is to be the best father, to be there for my kids. So if that means I have to let go of some of those things that I valued so much as a younger man, that has to take second step for being the absolute best father that I can be. Because what better gift to give the world than two beautiful daughters that are unbelievable, that will be able to give back, even more, right? So that gift there is massive, and it's something that's valued in the Bible, and it's it should be valued more in our cities and cultures, I think.
I completely agree, man. And I just got to say, I mean, I'm not sure about you, but I'm convinced that, all of this inversion is to obfuscate that our world is bigger than we realize and that there really are like, more continents to just thinking there's seven. And, of course, I mean, we'll see. I shared with you, Jaron, Austin Whitsitt, they're on their way to Antarctica. I mean, allegedly, it is what it is, whether there's a 24-hour sun or not. It doesn't, it's one way to look at trying to the final experiment. Is it a globe? Is it flat? But what I'm trying to get at is there really is something to like the center of this world. If we believe there's that, magnetic rock, the black rock, I think it's just
Mm-hmm.
in the world. There's really that whole idea of, like you said, the inversion of, trying to dilute God, but the opposite being like this is God's creation and God's clock, and like we're these powerful creators, and it's only that we can have, it temporarily like a spell, a confusion of a hypnosis of forgetting, like that we're here, and even in envisioning things, man. Hopefully, in our life and at the latest or next generation, to reinvigorate the airships and to just get this figured out, where it shouldn't have to be like, some type of theory, you know.
Mm-hmm. It could be a very quick switch, right? This whole world could be a very quick switch. We're all here to be a part of it, and I like the idea of, yeah, like being God's children, right? That I get it. Like it used to be like, oh, the universe and this and that. Now I just like, it's God. It's God everything. And then I just simplified that way for me anyway. I tried the other ways. But yeah, right. If you're a child of God and God loves you and wants the best for you, doesn't mean you're not going to go through hard times, but does say don't fear, and you have that on your side. And the same with the Satanism stuff, like from watching these satanic interviews, and like even there's a book called The Gift of Fear, and it's about how predators work, how how these people who might try to kill people or whatever, like how that kind of mind works. They're always looking for weak people, right? Someone who is strong, who's connected, mentally, physically, emotionally, right? They're not the targets. They're like cats. And I mean, they want that easy prey, right? So the more spiritually sound you are, if you are connected by your Father God, if you are praying for, dear God, show me a way. It doesn't have to be Jesus. You can try it out, see if it works for you. Jesus, if you're real, show me a sign. Otherwise, I'm going to go try this thing. Right? You're welcome to do that. Like, or God, I'm seeking the truth. Please give me some signs. Help me on my way. I'm seeking the truth. I want to be. And that was like, even for me in my experience, I always asked for that. God, and I pray to God. Right? I just say, God, please show me a way to be helpful. God, please help me, know the truth. Please speak through me. Please, bring me the experiences I need to grow and to make a positive impact here. And I just journal. I try to get more and more clear with what my intent was, and I did that for most of my life. And then these last 4 years have been very fascinating because it's humbled me back to like I don't know what is going on, exactly what I want. Like I have an idea of what I want. I'm just like basically holding on to the boat, trying not to drown because of all these horrible things that have happened, that have been incredibly challenging to deal with. And I think that that's just a part of a season. that I've got to go through. And interestingly, it's brought me closer to God. Um, but um, I think we all have that power of intent, and daily prayer being so important. Daily prayer, daily journaling, daily communion with God, and just sincerely seeking. Right? It's like ask and you'll be given. Ask whatever the heck it says. It's getting late. But but yeah, what I'm talking about. So like I think that sincerity of seeking God, uh, I know I've had these experiences that go beyond, space and time and logic to know that there's a creator. To understand that creator, I have no idea. To connect to them, I can only guess and just explore, right? So maybe I was allowed to explore every other option. So if I can find some truth and articulate it in a meaningful way, I can steer people to the right idea. And I think steering people towards God and having that sincere intent, inviting them to pray, give Jesus a chance if you want. I think that, worst case scenario, it doesn't work out, is like a good guideline, but that sincerity of seeking, I think, is the most important, right? It's like seek first the kingdom of heaven, seek that first, right? Because you might get your butt kicked along the way, but we're flesh and blood for a little bit and then we go somewhere else. So I'd rather have a life of meaning, of purpose. And what if you do get judged? Like that's pretty terrifying too. Like, because like everything you do matters. Like, like there's a lot of stuff I wish I didn't do, and I'd like forgiveness for, but I am doing my best. And so if you have that kind of in the back of your mind, is like, how can I be of service, but how can I be honest and virtuous and not sinful and helpful, right? If nobody sinned, we wouldn't have any issues. Problem is, people are sinning like crazy all day, every day, everywhere, right? You're not going to love your neighbor. Like everything's going to be fine if no one's trying to be deceitful. So I don't know. Again, I'm just ranting. I really have no idea what exactly is going on, but I do my best to try to be a good person, to understand things. I did my best to have meaningful work and to try to put out things that could be helpful to people. And I'll continue to do that. And right now, my greatest job is to be a father. And we'll see how I can begin to explore some other options as time moves forward.
Well, I think you read my mind because earlier I was going to be like, hey, how would you like to wrap this up? Any closing thoughts? And you did a great job. And I couldn't help but kind of reference, I mean, I do like chess. I mean, I assume you maybe like to play chess. So sometimes when you say something like evaluating, or like the ultimate judgment, it's kind of like a game of chess, right? Like if you're using software or whatever, you can see like, oh, did every move, did we make the best move? But it doesn't really, matter, but it's one way to look at it, right? If we're always trying to grow and expand and develop more and more capacity for unconditional love and to be in alignment with creator. So with all of
You
that,
can't you
uh-huh.
can't you can't fake sincere intent, right? So if you intend in error, that's okay. Just have sincere intent, have sincere prayer, have earnest seeking of God and Creator and who you are, right? Have sincere intent, and then if it's all crap from there, that's still okay because you tried. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, you're quite an inspiration. I mean, like you said, I mean, I don't have to go on and on about all the different amazing guests you've interviewed, the 20 plus countries, 25 that you've traveled to, and, learning and connecting and just expanding. And then, like you said, it's all kind of culminated to your purpose being the best possible father, you can be. And, with all of that being said, man, I just commend you for everything you've been through. And I just wish you absolutely the very best with everything, man. I look forward to staying in touch and that, may the world become more free, and we wake up. But I'm pretty sure we're at that point, man, where like there could have been a point where there wasn't enough of us. I mean, I do think we both agree COVID maybe was a big test. I mean, seems like it was more tough up there in Canada, but overall, I think there wasn't enough people that were just completely sold, there was enough resistance, and that's what's kind of given me, hope that there's resistance to this whole, you know,
Oh, buddy, there's resistance, and you count your lucky days you live in Florida because I'm resentful. I was coaching people who were in Montana and Florida. You guys were free as birds. Nothing at all was going on. I was literally in house arrest, couldn't go to a restaurant. Everybody's disowning me. It sucked, but man, so you guys have it made down there. Count your blessings because that example is what is going out to the world. And what I can bring up as an example is like, why is not everybody dead in Florida? Why didn't everybody die in Montana? You know what I mean? So you are free. You have it, and you're going to be the reason why more people are free. So your country is incredible. You're even like your slogans are God first. You know what I mean? All like in your content, everything is like about God. So don't discredit your country. Be grateful for the gifts that you have over there, wherever you are. It's definitely going to turn the tide, but wherever you are, you're there for a reason. You're needed. Get your own connection with God in whatever way you want. And I think that things are going to be okay. I appreciate your work and your time and your effort for doing your part of trying to work toward a solution. Most people think about it, but you're actually doing it. So I know how much work it is to do a podcast. So I commend you. At least leave um, your show a nice review. Leave Alex a nice review because they help. It is an absolute ton of effort. You don't really make any money. So if you want to give them some money, that'd be great. I know that because I did it for a long time now. Yeah, so no, I just appreciate all the effort you're doing too, man. So
Well,
yeah,
thank
thanks.
you. I mean, you've been instrumental to my truth-seeking journey, and I can only imagine how many others feel the same way. So thank you for being you, man, and being that beacon of light.
My pleasure, buddy. Well, I appreciate you.
I appreciate you too. All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us in the Truth Lab. And this was episode number 9. So almost at the double digits. Do you remember that? It was probably a long time ago too.
Atta boy. Heck yeah, it's exciting. 10. Yep. Hell yeah.
But anyways, thanks. I really value your time and all your wisdom that you shared too, man. And I wish you and your family the very best. So thanks again. Bye.
Appreciate it, buddy. All
Thanks.
right. See you guys.